So the plan for this first session today is to talk about the release process scripts, and then we'll, after that, get into the tools, star bin, star scripts for development, testing. Okay. So I think the place to start perhaps is we have this document where we sort of stored some of the magic incantation secrets, whatever prerequisites, to be able to run the ONOS release process. And so currently we've gotten the process down to a point where there's been at least 4 different individuals who have been able to run this, but it does require a lot in the way of credentials. Yeah. Sort of at a high level, what we do is we package the ONOS bits into a jar file and a zip file, which get uploaded to the S3 on Amazon for distribution. We build and package about 180-ish, 200 artifacts that get uploaded to Sonatype, and then Sonatype mirrors them to Maven Central, repo1.maven.org. We package the Java doc and upload that to a machine so people can get access to the Java doc at api.onosproject.org. So we upload the docs there.
So all this happen automatically or doing it manually?
So we have scripts that cover most of this process.
Once you have everything set up, and as Brian said, you need some fairly scary permissions in order to do that. Okay. Like I've done the last 15, 20 builds, and you just invoke the script, and it takes a while, and it's done. Okay. The issue with the permissions is the really scary one is you need push access to the Git tree in order to do that. So that's really scary. The Java docs are uploaded to the wiki machine, so you need a special account there. You need a special account on Sonatype so you can publish the Maven artifact. I think that's it, right?
Sonatype, wiki, AWS credentials.
Oh, AWS is the other one, yeah. So there's 4 things.
Garrett.
How is that you tag a particular build as release build? Like every night you'll be having nightly build, and then you'll be having some amount of testing? Or is it like you freeze a particular commit and then you just take off the head of the commit and then declare this as a release build?
So basically the way the process works is when we decide we're going to do a release build, the very first thing you do is lock the tree. We do that through Garrett plugin so that no commits can move. You invoke the script. Among other things, what the script will do is it will insert a tag into the Git repo saying, this is build 110 release candidate 5 or whatever it is that you're doing, just a string. And then at the end of the build, it will then set the tag. As part of the build, it will take that tag name and also change the internal versions. Remember I was talking about yesterday about all the internal versions are everywhere? One of the things it does in that script is set all those versions, check those files in, then it sets the tag. So now that's the actual sources that are being built to be deployed. At the very end, after everything is deployed, it flips it back to a snapshot so that ongoing development can happen. And so that process is all automatic. You don't actually, it doesn't require it.
Okay. So satisfied is RC1, RC2 candidate comes out?
Yeah, that's literally a string that I type. It can be any. Okay. OSGI has some limitations of what version strings look like the dots have to be a certain number in a certain place and stuff like that. Other than that, you can call it whatever you want. The build doesn't care what they're called.
Okay. But do you follow any kind of naming conventions?
We try to, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, typically we'll use just RC in this project. In another project, we will use beta and other things. Right. But yeah, we just used one thing, right, is that it's sort of a chicken and the egg problem, right? And this is kind of what Ray was trying to allude to yesterday. You have to stamp the version into the artifacts when they're getting created, right? So you stamp the version in while they're being built because those version numbers end up in the manifest, in the generated POM files, in the, in some cases in source code, right, in a few places. So the version gets baked into the artifact, and then you've got to do some degree of, build, test, whatever, tag, commit tag rather, and then at that point, you have a release. And so, theoretically, we want to, if you're going to build a release, set the version first, do the build, then do the testing, then do the commit, push, tag, release.
So assume that I actually tag something called RC1, and then I do a testing, I find some bugs. So then you'll create a ticket, you'll try to solve it, and then there'll be RC2. Again, you will do the full round of testing, and once the testing goes well, you'll have this RC2 as the latest version that will be shipped.
No, RC2 doesn't get shipped. Then we do it. So this is one of the problems, right? Is you have RC2 you're happy with, right?
Yeah.
Now you have to do another release, right? Where you call it, 1 point,
There's no way, I was trying to get this point across yesterday. There's no way to say, we really like these bits, we're going to release them. You always have to do one more build.
Right, so let us put some context here, right? So 1.11 is going to come out.
Yep.
So with 1.11, could you just walk me through what's going to happen?
Okay.
Yeah, so at some point, when we get near the code freeze,
Okay.
there'll be, some number of check-ins that were in before the code freeze. Sometimes the reviews for those spill over a little bit, but at some point the code that made it in is going to be in part of the release. Is in. At that point, what we'll do is we create the support branch. So the support branch is the ONOS-1.11 branch, and master then is
Open for development.
free for development. Yeah. So now on this support branch, we'll start around the time maybe a week or so before the release with RC1.
Okay.
Right. We put together an RC1, and then the test groups and other folks will start running the full suite of show and smoke and integration system tests, whatever, right? If they find some bugs or regressions or whatever, yeah, they get logged in Jira tickets, and then those things will get solved on the support branch, cherry picked back into master usually. And then, we kind of we go through solving those bugs. At some point, things look good. We create another RC2. They run their tests again, say there's another problem, gets logged in Jira, gets solved, RC3. At that point, they say it looks good. So at that point, what we do is we create another build called 1.11.0.
Okay.
And 1.11.0 then is the one that gets published and released.
Okay.
Now, one thing that, one somewhat caveat there is that the main release doesn't go through a round of testing until after it's been released.
Okay.
And so we have a couple of options there. One is that we could put it through, we could stage 1.11.0, and then we could run it through the round of testing before it's made public. Like that, there's nothing that would prohibit us from doing that. We could hand the bits off to the test team. We could put it somewhere that's not necessarily publicly accessible, have people run through it, and then from there, we can push the button to make it globally available.
Like functionally, RC3 is equivalent to 1.11.0, right?
Functionally, yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah, but then why not reuse? Why not retag RC3 itself as 1.11.0?
Because the version is literally baked into the binary.
Oh, okay.
Some of the class files and all of the sort of artifact files have that string in there.
A few of the class files have the RC bits, and every single one of the jars has a manifest that has the version baked in.
Okay.
And the problem with Maven, and maybe other people have figured out ways to solve this, and if there are better ways of doing it, definitely open to them. But if you don't have the dash snapshot tag, Maven typically views the artifacts as immutable.
Okay.
And so the problem with having, you know, a larger and larger group of people playing with a 1.11.0 thing is that those people need to clear out or update their cache policy to re-download release bits. Only the snapshot bits get periodically checked. So yeah, with these Maven style artifacts, or even OSGI style artifacts, both Maven and OSGI, both bake versions into the artifacts, and then from Maven's perspective, these things get cached potentially indefinitely.
So for every snapshot build you're doing, the artifact will be published in Maven?
No. Well,
so we usually do publish the snapshot. They don't get published in Maven Central.
they get published to some
Maven
type.
Central doesn't do snapshots,
Yep.
but there's a artifact repository called Sonatype, which is just a Maven repo. They have a public portion and a snapshot portion. Public portion goes mirrored to Maven Central. That's for release artifacts. Snapshot portion is available to anyone who wants to manually specify that repo.
So anyway, the reliability is limited, right? At least for snapshot version, because a lot more people will be depending on Maven Central. Only a handful of people would be depending on Sonatype.
There's no problem with snapshots, right? Snapshots get updated. You can change the bits of a snapshot.
Because they're based on a timestamp. They're not based on a
You
cache.
can't change the bits of a release.
A released artifact has a known hash.
Literally a check that's
Yep.
string dot equals dash snapshot, right? Like there's a check. Like dash snapshot in Maven world is treated differently than every other type of artifact.
Yeah, so you are actually releasing the release artifact only after tagging that this is going to be released with, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what's the problem there?
Sorry,
Well, the problem is you have to execute the build again, which then invalidates any artifacts you've already produced before.
you can't, in some projects, right, you can just change a magic bit in a file, or you can change like one version string somewhere, right? And you can promote an RC to a release build, right? The problem with our process is that because the version string is in just like a billion places, mostly due to OSGI and Maven for that matter, it's not feasible really to do that transformation.
Without entering a complete build cycle.
And even if we did have, I'm sure we could write some code that actually went in and fixed this. But it would literally change the SHA, so it would break it anyway. It would be a new release anyway. You literally cannot take the bits that say A and make them A.release. You can't do that. You have to reissue everything in order to do that. It's a pain.
But I mean, the one thing that we don't do, right, is like we don't do that full round of testing. So typically what happens is we put out 1.11.0, right? And there's a full round of testing that occurs on the release bits. And sometimes there's a bug, right, that we should have caught before the release. And when that happens, we go, fix the bug, merge into the support branch, and then there's a 1.11.1.
That almost always happens.
The revision releases. Yeah, usually, within a week or two after we put out the main one, we have a revision release where, we don't go through the RC process on that, right? Because that branch is relatively locked down and stable.
Okay.
So that we just create the release version, push it out, and, going forward, once we decide we have a release, it's .1, .2, .3, .4. Move ahead. So I guess the steps, more or less, we've kind of got it down to a relatively small set. But the first is we verify you have the prerequisites. Do you have the environment variables, config files, user files set so that all the things you're going to need to do are done. Then we use a script that Ray was referring to, which is the edit. So this is calling a plugin. Sorry. We don't do this one anymore.
Nope.
Yeah, we replaced that. We used to have a way. We used to have a way where we mess with the Git project metadata subtree. We don't do that anymore.
If you scroll up, you actually went past the, it's all done in there now.
Oh, it's all done in, okay. So there's a main script that's gonna do more or less the following.
Basically everything.
Yeah, so we use a plugin that we talked about on Monday, Project Lock. Basically just locks out a branch, so that new submits are not permitted. The reason we do this is because we, pick a part of the tree that we want to use for the release. We don't want new commits to slip in, so that by the time we do the tag, we now have a merge conflict.
Yeah, exactly. I should modify the document to make that more clear, because this is, what you're looking at here is the old, that's all been subsumed into that script.
Into the script.
So basically, all you have to do now, yeah. It should be a pretty close copy of what we were just looking at.
Under
Tools, build, bin, or something.
Build.
Tools, build, release. No, they all sound the same, which is the problem.
Alright, so, great. So check prereqs, we already talked about. The next thing is block the tree, and then we have prepare release.
What prepare release is going to do for you is, you have this problem, you're building on a development machine, I have my own trees I don't want to mess with, I don't want polluting. What ONOS prepare release does is it basically pulls whatever tag you give it into a completely separate Git repo, CDs into there, and then does the build. So you don't have any problems of any of your local changes polluting what it is that you're trying to push up.
Yeah, we had,
Is this build going to Jenkins?
no, this is run on your, run wherever you want, right? Run on your,
Yeah.
They do the script in any machine and then make out the build.
stop it. I hate the calendar thing, it's so annoying.
Any reason why you're following that approach instead of not taking the Jenkins route?
Well, so the reason that we, well, okay, like most things in ONOS, right, this sort of evolved somewhat organically, right? We needed to publish something somewhere, and then we wanted to add Maven artifacts, and we wanted to do this, do that, right? This process only gets exercised about once every 3 months.
Yeah.
And so new stuff comes in where like the scripting we had put in place previously is broken now. For example, someone adds a version string somewhere, someone delinks part of the POM. When we had the POM-based project, delinking part of the POM means that the version doesn't get rolled in that area or that part doesn't get released. So anyways, the point is that this process started out as something that was almost entirely manual. We've scripted more and more of it, but it's not still like 100% in terms of its level of automation. And so for processes that have some degree of a human component, being able to redo a step of it, or being able to like debug the environment that it's in, do some other auxiliary checks that are not necessarily programmatic checks. It's just easier to run it in an environment that you have control over. But that's not to say that we aren't trying to make it more automated, right? Our goal is to drive this towards automation. This is more of a history lesson perhaps than a recommendation per se, right? The goal here is just kind of give you some idea about what we have in place today and kind of the tools and facility scripts that we have and some of the artifacts that get published and where they go. But by no means is this sort of our recommendation going forward, right? So yeah, I mean, this could absolutely be done as a Jenkins job. You give it a tag as a parameter for a build, you click build, and next thing you know, you've got something that's uploaded. But in order to do that with a reasonable degree of confidence, you'd have to have sufficient degrees of testing and sufficient exercising, failure checking, and bombing out, which we have a lot of, and we're building more of, but it's not, I wouldn't say 100%.
And as you can see, some of these like stepwise things, I'm sure could be done in a pipeline, such that you could, for example, do packaging at the same time you're doing testing. So at the end, you know that everything is kind of okay. I also think, Brian, that some of this stuff made and predate having Jenkins. I think we had some of these scripts before we even had Jenkins jobs that could run them. So this stuff has been around forever.
I mean, my question is more on following a full-fledged CI/CD process, right? I mean, one step even above automation, whereas so in projects that they have worked past, like Jira, they have a build system called Bamboo, and then they have Jenkins. So it's like from any given point, we'll be able to know whether this particular ticket is part of which build, and then there'll be a path to actually reach that build and download the artifact. So, but here I think we are actually manually making the release notes whenever you're releasing it, right?
Release notes.
So release notes, there's some degree of high-level summary, which is handwritten, but then there's also a query that we run over Jira that looks at the tags.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or the
Fixed in release
fixed in tag, and will automatically generate some release there.
Okay.
But that assumes that the released in tag is correct. Right? So someone could put a tag in there, released in whatever, and it doesn't necessarily. There's no verification for sure that.
Yeah. So the process that I was talking about, it will actually link the commit ID. So everything is through the Atlassian API, right? So they create a ticket using Jira, and then they do a pull request using Dash, and then they review it, and then that code gets built using Bamboo, which is again part of Atlassian API. So there's a way to actually link a commit to a Jira ticket to a build ID to a artifact. So are you thinking something like that kind of automation, at least in the near future?
I don't think we're opposed to using a different process for doing the release.
No, I don't think.
And I think, in general, we want to drive this towards making it more push button, more automated, and something that we could run on a more regular basis.
Okay.
So there's no opposition there, right? This is purely just sort of explaining what we have in place today, right? That was more the purpose of the session. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a bazillion tools for doing all sorts of stuff that is way better than what we're doing. But yeah, the point is that this, kind of like everything else, grew up somewhat organically. It started small. It started with just a simple script, and it sort of grew from there. And rather than take a step back and do some investigation as to what are the other options, it was just easier. Okay, we just add a line to the script here, right? Add a line to the script there. And it was something that was run relatively infrequently, and it wasn't too complicated. But I mean, I think at this point it's probably gotten to a point where it's fairly complicated, and it wouldn't be unreasonable to take a look at doing something different. But
so as part of this script release process, so what do you think the scope of this Brigade would be or should be?
A good question. Well, so one of the things we talked about in the charter, right, was maintenance of the build and release process documentation.
Which you can see is a complete wreck. It's literally just stream of consciousness, here was the command I typed that worked kind of stuff. There's no notion of anyone other than us doing it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, one option, right, for the short term would be to kind of take stake of the release process. And if you kind of started with the release process notes, and then from there, just sort of took note of these are the things that are getting published to where, these are the credentials you need to do that, and this is sort of how these artifacts are built, that would be a good inventory to start with.
Like documenting clearly how a release happens in ONOS.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the first step is figuring out what it is all we do, and then from there, if we decided, okay, we're going to take pieces of these, a lot of these scripts are not just one big monolithic script. It's a component that does this, a component does that, a component does that. Right? So maybe we can take those components and then rather than stringing them together with a big build script, we can string them together with, some other continuous integration deployment. Right? So, yeah, I think, if I had to say what the scope of this Brigade is, maybe first document what we have in a way that, is perhaps less biased, because I think if you asked, Ray or I to do this, we'd probably say, oh, it's pretty simple, just run this command.
And then check this, and then do that, and then check this other thing.
Yeah.
It's really not complicated at all.
So yeah, I mean, that might be a good first step. And then from there, once you sort of have a stock of what's being done, it could be expanded to actually implementing some new process.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that could be, you could realize, right, is like, why are we publishing 180 different jar files
We're actually not anymore.
via Maven Central?
Yeah.
That's what people want to use it for their Maven-based projects.
Well, no, but the thing is, people for the Maven-based project care about like API, right? They don't necessarily care about implementation jars, and you probably don't even want them depending explicitly on implementation jars.
Those aren't published.
Okay.
So that change was made in 1.9, where we now have, which has its own problems. We now have an explicit list of artifacts that are considered public artifacts. Those are the only ones that are published. So we've had problems where people have an app that depends on some API that's public within ONOS, but isn't public within the project. And sorry, you have to go back and re-release it. So that's not completely winning either. The reason we did that was mostly because the far and away, the slowest part of the build is the upload to some of that. That just takes forever. We don't know why, but you have all these jar files and you got to upload them one by one by one. It's not done in parallel. It's done
It could be done in parallel, but yeah, we just don't.
Yeah, there was some problem with Buck, right? We couldn't do that in parallel.
Well, Buck doesn't upload them in parallel anyway, because Buck doesn't.
Just call somebody who does the job.
The publish command at the time of the fork we're using, I don't know if it's better in the new version, but it's targeted at like uploading one or two artifacts,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not targeted at,
Yeah.
that being a main thing.
So in this document, there's a few other things we released, like the Yang tools, which I don't know, that's probably separate from
We released, Yang tools, Floxy, there's a few other random.
the Docker image. One of the things I have to do by hand at the end of the whole process is build a Docker image and push it up
And
to
then push it
Docker.
to Docker Hub.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's currently a different script that has to be invoked manually when you're done. And
After this release.
so Cord uses that heavily.
I use that heavily.
Use the Docker image, yeah. So, I mean, part of the issue you'll see as you go through this is we release ONOS in a lot of different ways. And I think we're kind of paring back now. I think we kind of just said, yeah, let's just do everything and see what people like. Far and away, most people grab that tag that we create and then build it off of that themselves. That's how most ONOS installations are done. There's a few people who grab the release bits, which is the tar.gzs that we create. And then we need the Maven Central stuff for like an app that's third party, right? So that we have to stay with. And I think, like you said, lately the Dockers are really something people are using a lot. We had created an RPM at one point. Don't worry about it.
Oh, we're probably gonna get near the other buildings, other scripts. Oh, okay.
I'll be there. Okay. So anyway, I think we're sort of evolving to the way we understand that people interact with this process also.
Okay.
Like only in the last month or so does QA even test the Docker image.
Okay.
We've never had a problem where the software ran but the Docker didn't. But it's certainly possible, right? The Docker is like a complicated process.
Because I work in telco environment, right? So there are people, they literally don't want to actually download code build the image and then use it.
Right.
They want something like ready-made solution, like something like apt-get. You want to run some command and then
Yep.
you want ONOS
Yep.
up and running.
Yeah, and then we had at one point invested a lot of time in generating an RPM, and it was just hard to keep it going. People didn't use it. The Docker's a much better way to do it.
Yeah, so that, I mean, I think, yeah, those are two perhaps concrete action items that the Brigade could take.
There was a third one that we discussed after ONOS build, which was the snaps model.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put that over here.
Oh, you did, good. Yep,
Docker, Karthus, dead,
That's what I
RPM,
can-
Snaps, maybe an artifact, right?
yeah. And there was one guy there who was like the guy who invented snaps or something.
Who worked with the show.
Oh, you worked on that?
Yeah.
Oh, that was your project. Okay, so you know all about that then. Yeah, he was all set to help me with stuff, and I'm like, we don't have the cycles for it right now. So if you wanted to do that, you could circle back with him, I'm sure he'd help you.
Yeah. I mean, he was the other guy. I mean, we both were part of hackathon, Los Maynard,
Mm-hmm.
but he was originally from Ubuntu, Canonical.
Yep.
He was the one who actually, taught me snaps, something like a crash course.
Well, that's great. I mean, if you're knowledgeable in that area, I think that would be a great thing to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so, at least that's sort of the high level. Yeah, we have a document, that describes some of the process and,
Which you're gonna share.
yeah.
Which document?
The one that you showed?
Well, that one,
Yeah.
it's, like I said, it's a mess.
So,
So we'll try to actually, take that information and convert it into a much more consumable wiki page.
Yeah, and also, so you didn't see it, there is this notion of a --Dryrun that you can put on the build script. And my intention there was twofold. One was to test the script. So basically, the intention of Dryrun is to go through the entire process, but not publish anything.
Okay.
It publishes to the local Maven repo instead of to Sonatype. So the idea was you could grab any release of ONOS you wanted to just to see that the build still works.
Something like preview.
Exactly. So you guys can certainly play around with that without needing any of these scary, being able to push and that kind of stuff. And I guess once we get a little further along, we have to figure out kind of what the model is like for Sonatype and for Amazon. User like stuff.
yeah, I mean, one option is to if you do it via like a Jenkins or something, you just do it.
Right, they just do it there.
The other thing is it's possible to create, with Sonatype you can just ask to be added to the group. With AWS you can create subusers. So, we may be able to work that out, but that's not really a technical problem.
Okay.
So apart from this, are there any compelling pain points that you have with the process?
I don't know. Ray's been running it more recently, so
What was the question?
do you have any compelling pain points or areas like to address
So-
interaction?
I think, for me personally, the biggest pain point is that my computer physically doesn't go, and I have to watch it. So there's two problems there. One is just that, why isn't Jenkins doing the build? That's what it does for a living. But the bigger pain point is that people break stuff. Like Brian was saying, there's this sort of, again, it's this hokey sort of Maven way of looking at the world, but we have a check in there that basically says that string snapshot in all caps appears in any file. It's like, that's an error. It should never happen. That should always, when you're doing a release build, should always be a release version number in there. And that just breaks all the time. People either create some backwater POM file that's not connected to the top level one, so the tool that goes through and fixes all the snapshots doesn't work, or someone shoves it in a random unit test, or, there's just always something, right? And so there's always this, the first time you do this build after the 3 months you haven't done it before, it will always break. And I just haven't come up with a good way of, I was gonna do the dry run thing. I was hoping that at least that would solve that problem. I did the dry run build as part of the nightly. We'd know right away, boom, something is broken. But then we were like, we're gonna get rid of the POM files completely, and we're gonna use only Buck. And I thought, okay, well, Buck doesn't really have this problem, so it's okay. But we're still stuck in the middle between the two.
Yeah, if Buck is the one that we're using for release build, then why this snapshot problem appears again?
Because we still publish the artifacts to Maven.
Well, so no, the thing is, Buck will build the palms, like, it'll auto-generate the palms that it uses to upload to Maven. But we still have the palms in the tree, and if people check the code out and build it with Maven, which many people still do, then they have this problem. So we kind of need to make sure that the palms that are being distributed are, somewhat accurate until we delete them.
No, but when we do, we constantly build using Buck, right? So we are the one who is performing the release build. So when you do with Buck, then why we end up in a situation where we have the snapshot jars being built?
There's no snapshot jars being built. The problem is that the code,
The POM
the palms
files.
exist in the code, and if someone checks the source code out at the release,
In the POM files, you have burned in there that you depend on the ONOS API version 1.10-snapshot.
Okay.
And there's this mechanism to go through and say, no, you're actually dependent now on ONOS 1.10.0. And that's the part that's very brittle. That's the part that breaks all the time.
Okay. So in your release build steps, there's one step that's actually going over every font file and checking whether you're dependent on snapshot.
Indirectly, yeah. So there's two things that happen. One is at first we invoke this, it's Maven, so there's a plugin for that, right? So we invoke this plugin that you basically say, here's my snapshot version, here's my official version, go fix everything. And it goes and rewrites all the font files. So that's the first step. The second step is we have a script that we wrote that checks, unless you're on this list of allowed whitelist references to snapshots, you're going to fail to build if you have one. And that's the part that trips us up all the time.
Okay, I think that even if somebody has written a form file such that they're depending on a snapshot, assume that it is a module. But when we build, we won't use the Maven way of building their project, right? We'll be using the Buck way of building their project.
Correct, but we still have to rewrite the POM files for the people who do use Maven. The POM files that get shipped up as part of the artifact have the proper,
Okay.
Within that release, have the proper dependency. And that's the part that's just super annoying. And if we could just break the Maven dependency, then we wouldn't have to do any of this stuff anymore. In the Buck build, there's one reference to the snapshot, which just gets fixed and that's it. That's at the very top level Buck config. There's a reference to what your current release is. And we change that and then do the build and it's fine. So we didn't go through, Brian, there's a couple of, I don't know, do we care? There's a couple of manual steps we still have. I don't remember, because of course it's been a few months. That's the other problem, is I always forget how things work. There's the top level POMs, which I thought I integrated into the process. I think Buck does that now.
the creating a support branch?
No. You still have to do this. So that's in the wiki, there's actually a page that has the downloads. You still have to manually edit that.
Oh, right, so there's a, this is the download.
Yeah. So that page is manual. And when I do a release, the last thing I do is I put the links, the new release name and the links in this page so people can find it. This part here that generates top level POMs, we do that in Buck now. You don't have to do that anymore. But you do have to, what do they call it, when you unstage, going from staging to deploy or whatever.
Promote,
yeah, you still have to, we do that by hand for a good reason. So at the end of the entire process, right, you've got, your tar.gz has been uploaded to Amazon. You've got a bunch of artifacts sitting in Sonatype in a, it's not a snapshot repo, but it's sort of a staging repo. You still have to manually log into Sonatype and say, yes, I want to make this go out. And the reason we make that manual, we could easily make it automatic. But like Ryan was saying, you get one shot at that. If you screw that up, you got to spin the release and redo it with a different version number.
So we always have that last, so you can check, you know, does it look like it's got enough files in it, does it look like things got published? You know, maybe if we trusted our build environment more, we would make that automatic, but right now that's not automatic.
Okay. So only then it gets mirrored to the Maven Central.
Right. So up until that point, in the Maven universe, no one is aware of your build. So if something got screwed up in the build, you can just delete that repo and the release never happened. You can reuse that release number. Once you promote that guy, that's it. You can't call it back.
It's kind of like doing a force push to a repo, right? Like, if you catch it quickly enough, it's possible to overwrite artifacts. It's not really, there's not a good API, right? So we found ways, like, if you have a bad artifact, to, like, replace it. But then, you know, people who have downloaded it to caches or other mirrors, like, may not get that new one. It's kind of like with like a CDN or GitHash or these Maven Central artifacts, like, once it's published and sort of expected to stay more or less the same. So, yeah, for all intents and purposes, you know, once they're promoted to Maven Central, they really need to.
So where is this Sonar type actually reside? That the repo is inside ON.Lab or?
No,
it's a company that does this for open source projects.
Oh.
We also sell a solution.
Oh, for companies, yeah.
Yeah, so Sonotype basically, is a company that does, software release, deployment management, whatever. As a service to open source projects, they run a copy of their software, for free.
Okay.
And you can apply as an open source project, and then you upload the artifacts to them, and they've got the integrations with the Maven Central mirrors. But I mean, theoretically, yeah, you could run your own artifact or your Nexus or whatever, and you know, figure out how to mirror your stuff to Maven Central and all that good stuff. But yeah, we just use Sonotype. Okay. Sonotype. Anyway,
So anyway, that's the blood and gore behind the build process. As I was saying before, we do also build the Yang tools through a slightly different but similar process. That's in that same article, that same document, how to do that.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys are involved with Yang tools or not. It's a separate repo, separate release cycle, separate everything, right?
largely under the ONOS project though, so.
What's that?
It's largely gonna be under the ONOS project though.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
That's when you're talking about two versions of Yang tools.
No, I mean, the raise point is higher level, right?
Yep.
We have this Yang tools repository with the Yang compiler, code generator, and plugin.
Separate Git repo.
Separate repo.
Yeah, which is gonna be more and more of an issue as we
Yep.
move into.
Separate Garrett tree,
Well, so,
separate everything.
you know, as we move into code disaggregation, right, we're gonna have multiple repos we have to deal with. And the question is whether we run releases on sub-repos as project teams are ready. And we have to have infrastructure for them to do releases, you know, if and when they want. And then whether there's there's the main repo script manifest, and there's, you know, per distribution manifest, and you can push your stuff in and they do all the, I mean, I don't know how we want to do that.
Yeah, I don't know either. I'm just trying to raise the point that that is there. It's one of my responsibilities when I handle builds. I have to be able to do betas and release builds off of that tree as well.
But then why you guys are not using GitHub? They have the release tagging process there.
Not really, right?
I mean, yeah, but you could really monitor and tag releases there.
The tagging part is the easiest part of the whole thing, right? It's git tag, right? It's a single command, right? The challenge here is just because you tag your release in GitHub doesn't necessarily mean anything, right?
You have to produce the binaries, that's the.
Right, you start to produce the binaries, and then you can upload them to somewhere on GitHub and put the release. I mean, I'm not necessarily opposed opposed to using GitHub. It's just there's going to need to be an entirely sort of new set of development workflow. I don't think repo tool works with GitHub for that matter. I'm not sure. It doesn't look like, right? It looks like it's integrated to Garrett. Again, the easiest part of the whole thing is git commit, git tag, push tag, right? That's not a problem. And that's across any Git repo for that matter. Now, okay, yeah, you have a releases tab in GitHub, great, but you still have to upload the artifacts there somehow, and you still have to build them. And before they can be built and tagged, they need to be put in with the right version number. So
yeah, but they have a lot of plugins to integrate with a lot of build systems, right? A lot of CI/CD systems.
sure,
Here we have
Circle and all that.
everything is manual, and so like, yeah, I agree that we have better control there, but there, I think the process is more organized. So I can, so as any community member, I can just go to that project and see which release is building, which release is latest start item, what are the commits behind that release, stuff like that. And if at all I manage the tickets there, then it will be more easy for me to associate the pull request to a Git commit. That is coming under a particular tag release.
Yeah, I mean,
I
think there are merits to using GitHub. Largely the reason why we went with Garrett was because a lot of these integrations didn't exist when ONOS project started.
Oh, okay.
You couldn't do code reviews. You can only have comments on pull requests. You couldn't have automated validation jobs that voted. Like that would have all been a manual process. There were some plugins, but largely speaking, I mean, we evaluated GitHub for Garrett, and it was really hard to gate things with GitHub / impossible. Anybody could just push and merge and do whatever they wanted to, right? They had committer rights. So GitHub has added a lot of tooling over the past couple of years to do code reviews, to have these automated jobs vote on stuff, to have them automatically kicked off. For a lot of open source projects, these things are free. So I agree with you that it's a different landscape today, and it's actually a pretty attractive landscape today. Now the question is, do you torch everything and rebuild everything from scratch? And you're going to run into a whole slew of problems, I mean, which maybe you want to deal with, that's fine. Or do we continue to try to work with the tooling that we have? And again, if you want to take on the challenge of trying to do that, like that's fine. But it'd probably be worth doing, some investigation before starting down that route.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of open source projects that are moving to GitHub first, or have always been GitHub first. But the question is, how do you delegate responsibility, and how do you do gating when these projects hit sort of a critical mass?
Even if there is no compulsory need to actually move, if there is a need, then probably you look out for.
Maybe there's a compelling argument to do so, and if so, let's talk about it.
Okay.
But again, the release process we've largely done independently of the standard nightly build, et cetera, because it's been fairly brittle. And as it becomes more robust, and if there was investment in making it more robust, there's nothing that would prevent you from doing this as part of an automated framework. Yeah.
I get that point.
So just briefly before we have lunch, I think one thing I wanted to point out is within ONOS, there's a lot of these scripts that we have for doing various things. There's scripts for development that live under bin. There's scripts for, I don't want to go through all of them, but there's a bunch. So largely speaking, under the tools directory, and this is kind of what I wanted to show, right, is there's scripts that are more or less related to build. So some of this is plugin stuff. Some of this is related to publishing packages and APIs. Some of this is related to doing the build process. Some of this is relating to the Sonar stuff, uploading the documents to the wiki, uploading the S3 stuff. So when you're working on the build and release, or the release process rather, and some of the build steps that we work on, there's some stuff in this build directory. For development, there's several scripts that people find useful in addition to like the bash profile.
Yeah.
But their scripts, this is a wrapper around the REST API for ONOS applications to push application code. There's scripts to create apps using the archetypes, etc. For packaging, we have some scripts that get included in the ONOS tarball. These are the scripts we looked at in the tarball the other day: ONOS service, secure SSH, etc. There's also the branding that lives here, as well as the scripts that Buck uses to build the tarball.
Okay.
Also, we had the init scripts, which we talked about to run like System 5, System D, and Upstart. There was some stuff that gets overlaid on the craft etc directory. Some of the stuff we had for RPM and Debian creation, which is a larger than it hasn't happened. And then finally, we have some test scripts. These are largely scripts that are leveraged by STC, but they could be used directly by a developer if they wanted to. Like, for example, some people use ONOS install. But yeah, largely these are scripts that are available for STC when STC is running. It's right alongside the cells, configs, scenarios that we talked about as part of Thomas' STC Turbo as well. And then tutorials, I guess these are just an additional place bucket for random tutorial related scripts. But yeah, largely speaking, the organization here is builds for Buck-based build and release process, dev for local deployment, including the bash profile package, is stuff that gets overlaid for scripts used to build the ONOS release tarball, and then test for STC. That's more or less the overview. You can dig through that if you want. By default, these things do get added to your path. So if you look, for example,
I think largely you've been a fan of shell scripts or bash scripts. So any plan on moving to, I mean, not now, like any future plans on moving just to much more stable scripting systems like Python and Go?
But I'll answer your question in a second. The path includes you know, the various aspects of the various bin directories in this area, so you can run these directly. It's also the case that yeah, the bash profile by default will do this. So to answer your question about moving this to Python or Go, we've yeah, a lot of this stuff, again, the theme for the week kind of grew organically. Bash was a language that you know, the team knew fairly well and started on. I think that, you know, there's been multiple people within the community and within our team that have talked about, you know, moving a lot of this stuff to something like Python, where you can have library functions.
When you guys plan for lunch?
We're going to break by in a couple minutes and then have lunch.
Where do you guys want to go?
Mongolian. All right. You good, Jeffrey?
All right. Maybe we just finish like 2 more minutes and then we'll talk about it. So yeah, there's been some talk of moving to Python or something. Go is another language that we could theoretically move to. Ali, you know, always talked about building kind of like an ONOS tool CLI where a developer, you know, could start asking for various things. You register new types of commands with the CLI. It would do the orchestration from building, development, whatever. That never really went anywhere. I mean, the other question is, you know, for things like the STC stuff, you know, do we use Python? Do we use, you know, Puppet, Ansible, whatever, to do some of the deployment related activities? All these things are possibilities.
Some of the STC specific stuff, when I was writing scenarios, I tended to write them in Python, mostly because I was trying to teach myself Python. But I mean, it's neither here nor there. Right? It's just there's code there that's in Python. I don't think anybody would
thought about. Just to set up your development environment, doesn't instruct. So it's a big undertaking.
I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, again, definitely open to letting, people in this brigade or others run
Yeah.
things, but the purpose, I think, here is just to give you an overview of what's there currently, and if there's a need or a desire to move to something better, and by all means, we can explore those options. Yeah, I don't know that there's explicit action items here. In the charter, I don't know if this was explicitly called out either.
Let's just paste something.
Yes, I've pasted a link on what we discussed yesterday about Jenkins. So I don't know whether we can discuss it now or whether I can wait before after you come back from lunch.
We can, I mean, how long do you want to discuss it for?
Sorry? But it's like, I think it's like 3 minutes. If we go to configuration on this, of this pipeline, actually, I did not see the script because like, the script was supposed to have like the steps and, yes, the steps for the pipelines. So where does this job, find the script to run all the steps?
So as Ray was mentioning, you have two options, well, at least two options. You can either say that you're going to build a pipeline script like directly in line here.
Yes.
Or what you can do is you can say that the pipeline script is going to come from the source. And so here we have a repository URL, ONOS, and then we have the branches to build master. And then the path here is Jenkins file. So this is relative to the root. And so you can see that there's this Jenkins file script in the source code.
Okay.
But it might make sense if you're just doing some testing to do your testing by just copying this into here.
In the script, yes.
And then you can work with it here. You can iterate without having to check code in. And then when it's gotten to a point you're happy with, then you can check this script into the source code. So for testing, you can do it this way, and then eventually you want to pull these scripts from the source.
Okay, I got it.
This is where they live.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I guess we're going to take a break for lunch. We'll be back at 1 p.m. Pacific to continue with the schedule for this afternoon, which is
sure.
Talk about the process, governance, and Garrett rules.
Okay, wonderful. See you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.